I really want to focus on three things this morning. I really want to talk about accelerating enterprise agility, not just agility within the delivery teams, but do your companies as a whole or particular parts of your company need to be more agile, more responsive, more adaptive. So I want to talk about that and why it may be important and the growing importance in a number of companies throughout the world. And then the second thing I want to talk about is really how do you get there, if you, in fact, you want to get there. And this is really adaptive leadership. So it's leading organizations who want to make a switch to being a more agile organization. And there are really two parts of that, doing agile and being agile. So what is it as an executive or a leader or a manager that you need to do differently? And how is it that you need to be differently? So I want to cover each of those things. Unfortunately, the Agile movement hasn't had a lot of good messages for management and leadership. They basically kind of boil down to don't micromanage or buy pizza and get out of the way. And you know, that doesn't give you a lot to go on if you're a manager. What we haven't really done is a good job of articulating what is macro management. If we don't want you to micromanage, what's the macro management? What are the kinds of things that you as managers and leaders really need to be about? And it's a lot more than these two things. So again, I really want to talk about enterprise agility and really how do you raise your responsiveness? If in fact you need to, how does your organization need to respond to the competitive world? And then doing agile and being agile. I've got a number of studies that have been done by a number of different organizations that I'm going to quote, and it's just to kind of give you an idea of what some people are thinking about. This is one done by The Economist magazine, fairly well-respected magazine. This was a study they did in March of 2009. 88% of executives cite organizational agility as key to global success. And I think they talked to something like 350 CEOs, something like that. 50% say that agility is not only important, but a core differentiator. They are not talking about software development agility. They are talking about organizational enterprise agility. This is probably one of the better, more detailed studies that have been done by IBM late last year. You can get it off the IBM website. It's well worth reading. It was a global study of about 1,500 CEOs and really what's bugging them. And as you can see, it just confirms what we really already know, right? More volatile, more uncertain, more complex, structurally different. The world is changing, and this is what the CEOs are really worried about. Interestingly enough, in this study, about 90% of the CEOs say, yes, all this stuff is going on, and kind of mirrors the Economist study. About 50% of those say, we don't really know how to handle it. So it's a big problem. We don't really know how to handle it. So really what we're looking at is a much more turbulent world. Have things changed a little in your organization over the last 3 or 4 years? Has the economy situation kind of impacted it? Yeah, of course, And really this turbulence causes two things. One is big opportunity. Don Sull, is a book I'll mention in a few minutes, wrote this book called The Upside of Turbulence. It's basically saying this is a real opportunity to do things differently, to take advantage of this turbulence, and also, of course, the danger in things changing on the downside. And really, my definition of agility has both of these things in it. One is, how can we exploit those opportunities? And secondly, how do we survive? So it's both of those things. But it's not just survival. It's taking advantage of those opportunities as they come along. So agility is the ability to create and respond to change in order to profit in a turbulent business environment. I think one of the strategic issues that companies have to really think about is, at their core, are they going to win by being responsive to the marketplace, Or are you going to win by being efficient? And obviously, any organization has to do some of both. But what is the core driver? Which one is the objective and which one is the constraint? Everybody has to be efficient. Everybody has to have low cost. But is that really our objective? Or is that a constraint on the other things that we need to do? And let me give you a couple of examples. Google and Walmart. Google is always trying new stuff. They're putting beta products out there. Some of them fail, some of them succeed. But they're always churning. They're always trying something new. They're really a responsiveness type of organization. Are they worried about cost? Yeah, some. But they worry about cost as a constraint on their responsiveness, not as an objective. Walmart, on the other hand, is exactly the opposite. Walmart is focused on low cost, efficiency, low cost of distribution. One of the data points I use when I'm talking about these two things is in the last 10 years, I've been to many, many Agile conferences. I've seen a lot of Google people there. I have never, until 2 months ago, seen anybody from Walmart. And 2 months ago at the Agile Executive Forum in Salt Lake City, there was one Walmart exec. So I have to say I have now seen one. And it was kind of interesting. He was on the online division of Walmart, which you might expect. So again, the first thing you might need to do is to look at your organization and see, as an organizational whole or as subunits of the organization, what's our primary focus? Is it responsiveness and really responding to customers, responding to technology, responding to the marketplace, or is it efficiency? I like this quote by Seth Godin. There are only two choices. Win by being more ordinary, more standard, and cheaper, or win by being faster, more remarkable, and more human. You can win either way. You notice that that's what this statement says. You can win either way. Where you don't win particularly well is in the middle, trying to do some of both. So if you look at what's going on in the management world today, there's a lot of new stuff out there. This is not Agile software development. And you can really, I think, sort of lump this into three categories of things that are Agile-like in the management community. There's this whole set of different books around next generation management. Things like Radical Management by Stephen Denny, Leadership Agility by Bill Joyner and Stephen Josephs. There are a number of these different things, and nobody has kind of consolidated around a name for all of this. There are different names in different books, as opposed to sort of the traditional command control approach to management, which kind of has a label. And so I've used my label, which is adaptive leadership, for this. There's a whole lot of good stuff going on in the lean, and in particular the lean startup movement. One of the things I talked about earlier in terms of taking advantage of opportunities. In order to take advantage of opportunities, even in big companies, you sort of have to have pieces of the organization that work in a startup mode. And there's some very interesting stuff going on in the lean startup movement. Eric Ries is sort of the guru in the lean startup movement. Just to show you how much interest there is in this, the New York Times list of best-selling books, the Lean Startup book was number 2 a couple of weeks after it came out. So Eric, whatever good the material is, Eric's done a good job of marketing. And then there's a whole set of things around a concept called beyond budgeting. And Jeremy Hope is one of the leaders of that movement. He wrote the original book on beyond budgeting. He's got a brand new book out called The Leader's Dilemma, really how to build adaptive organizations. And I'm about halfway through that. I'm reading on I got it before I came over here, and I was reading it on the airplane. So again, there's a lot of stuff going on in the management movement, and a lot of this is very, very similar to what's going on in the Agile software development world. So let me give you an example. This is The Gap, big retailer. I've worked a lot with Pat Reed, who is one of the directors at The Gap in the online division. And 3 or 4 years ago, The Gap decided that they wanted to take on a new brand. So it's called the Athleta brand, high-end athletic wear for women. And it was going to be a completely online brand. They were not going to have it in any stores. And so they went about essentially creating this online brand. And they did it in a few months, got it up there, and it was successful. So they did it fairly quickly. And what happened was they had women that would basically give them feedback and saying, we want to see some of these clothes in the store. So there was a lot of requests for Athleta stores. And so they decided to build a pilot to see how that would work out. Pilot, new opportunity, move fast. So they went to their stores building department and said, how long will it take you to build us a store? And the answer was, 12 to 15 months, something like that. The stores group, the brick and mortar people, they're tasked with being efficient, right? They're tasked with building the 104th store, not the pilot store. And so the management of the online group, which was the Bits and Bytes group, went to the president of Gap and said, we need to do this faster, and we can do it. And so the Bits and Bytes people built the first store because they, as an organization, were more agile, more responsive. They managed to get it up in about a fourth of the time, 3 or 4 months. They rented space, they didn't build. They cut a lot of corners, which was, for example, rather than tie into the corporate accounting systems, they used QuickBooks. And they were able to get a store up and going in about 3 or 4 months. And it proved to be successful. Now, if it had proved to be unsuccessful, right, well, they would have lost 3 or 4 months and the money to put into that. But they wouldn't have lost a year. Now, they're 8 months ahead of the game in terms of making a decision about whether or not to scale Athleta stores. So one of the things that they talk about in the lean startup movement in terms of taking advantage of opportunities is do it quickly and get out there and get feedback from the customer, and then after you've sort of proven the product, then you scale. But all too often in big organizations, you're worried about the efficiencies of scale too early, right? Early on in the process. Now, the other thing I want to talk about here is the brick and mortar people within the Gap were not doing a poor job. They were doing the job that they were set up to do, right? To build the 104th, the 105th store. So you got to be careful about the pieces of the organization and what they're tasked to do when you have to do things like take advantage of opportunities. Again, back to the IBM CEO study, I think I've talked about most of these things. Build operating dexterity. The 3 things they talked about in this study that were important were building operational dexterity, creative leadership, and reinventing customer relationships. Another study done by the Sloan School at MIT, and again, I don't know exactly how they conducted this study. It was done in 2006, but it talks about agile organizations have 29% higher returns per share. That's not bad. And again, a fairly well-respected organization. Whether that's 29% or 28% or 25% doesn't make any difference. At least these studies are sort of pointing in the same direction. This is a screenshot from Flickr talking about responsiveness. Flickr was last deployed 26 minutes ago, including 8 changes by 3 people. In the last week, there were 47 deploys of 364 changes by 19 people. How many of you can deploy that quickly, that often? That's not the real question, though. The real question is, could your organizations benefit from faster deployment? And so this raises one of the critical questions from an IT perspective in terms of agile development and where it's going. And on this chart, you really look at things like strategic impact. How does agile development impact the business strategically? And we sort of move from what I'd call the initial phase of agile, maybe 8 to 10 years ago, 7 to 10 years ago, something like that, in which we did iterations, We did daily stand-ups. Maybe we did a little pair programming. It was really sort of iterative development. We maybe increased our testing a little bit. XP talked about continuous integration, but not too many people were actually doing continuous integration. And then the next stage was really the continuous integration stage. My checkpoint for whether or not you are doing continuous integration is, are you doing comprehensive automated acceptance tests? Now let's talk about comprehensive. I was working with an organization several years ago. They had about 500 people in the development organization. We were taking them Agile all at one time. I was doing an assessment in there, and I was sitting in with a senior leadership team during one of their meetings. And they were reporting on their metrics. And they were saying 95% of their automated tests were passing. Great. 41 out of 42 tests for an organization of 500 people. They were fooling themselves. Salesforce.com, Steve Green, Salesforce.com is one of the huge success stories of Agile from a business perspective. Steve Green was talking at the Agile conference several months ago in August. In their build pipeline, they have 100,000 automated acceptance tests that they run every time they do their build pipeline. If the percentage of automated tests drops below, I don't know, it was like 98% passing, they shut it down and nobody can check in until they get it fixed. So they really have a build pipeline that is dependent on maintaining a very high quality. That's what I mean by continuous integration. The next phase is really continuous delivery, continuous deployment. Continuous delivery anybody can do, and it really is getting it to the point where you can deploy it. Continuous deployment is a business decision about how often you actually want to deploy. For example, if I have a online retail order processing kinds of system, that might be something where deploying a new features once a day, once a week, might be real advantageous. I doubt that deploying once a day for your payroll system is going to have a business advantage to it, right? So continuous delivery, continuous deployment really in some ways depends on what's the business need in that particular area. But it can have an enormous impact on the organization. So as I said, the online division of Gap, for example, they're moving very strongly into this continuous delivery, continuous deployment mode. But one of the things that happens as you move from left to right is you move outside the realm of an Agile delivery team. Over on the left-hand side, I'm doing iterative development. Pretty much can be restricted to developers and testers and architects, maybe a few product owners here and there, but doesn't really impact a lot of the other parts of the organization. The more you move to the right, the more you involve people like operations, and that's why continuous delivery and DevOps are really kind of talked about in the same sentence. So you have to involve operations. Operations has computer operations. Do they have a responsiveness mindset or an efficiency mindset? And that's what they're supposed to do, right? They're supposed to be efficiency oriented. But what about when we really need to deploy much faster? There's a whole organizational change issue involved there. What about from the perspective of the marketing or sales or the people who have to respond to stuff that comes up on the web? You know, maybe they need to change their training, maybe they need to change their availability online, maybe they need to change their pricing. You know, there are a whole bunch of other things in the organization that may need to change. And so what happens is, as you move to the right, your potential strategic advantage increases, but also the impact on the organization and pieces of the organization that have to change increases, which means that I have to have more adaptability and agility within my organizations. I find too many organizations that are stuck in what I call Agile 101, right? The basics of Agile. And it hasn't gotten much past the delivery teams, and it hasn't gotten much past the basic rules. Now, you have to learn the basic rules, but then you've got to move beyond them. So sustainable agility says I have to have Agile more widely in the organization. Some of you may be familiar with the books, the Lonely Planet books, the travel books. The CIO of the Lonely Planet organization, he was one of the speakers at the Australian conference last year, and I was talking to him, and he said, you know we've got it made in terms of Agile in the organization when you walk into the legal department and they have stories on the board and they're talking about iterations and they're doing daily stand-ups, and that's when your adaptability has gone a little wider. So you get increasing benefits and investment, but also increasing commitment to being Agile. So really, at a company level, at a business unit level, we need to be asking questions in both these ways. In what ways does our business need to be more responsive? So from a business perspective, where and how do we need to be more responsive? And then secondly, from a capability perspective, if we could deliver solutions much faster via continuous design and delivery, how could we take advantage of that? Right? So we might go to some of our business leaders and say, we could do this. How would it help you? Or this is how we think it might help. Again, as you look at sort of the frontiers of Agile, if you look at the basic iterative development, there's a ton of books written in that area. There's a few books written in continuous integration. As of right now, I only know of the continuous delivery book by Jez and David. So you can see sort of just in the books that are being published what sort of the leading frontier is. Another thing that from an executive management perspective, you really have to take a look at as you're looking at this responsiveness, efficiency kind of thing is where and how do we want Agile in our organizations? Most organizations, I would say, right now are primarily at the operational level. They look at Agile delivery as a different software engineering approach and not much more than that. And that's fine. That works. You can get some benefit from that. But is there a way in which Agile can really be a strategic business advantage? So Salesforce.com has said Agile is a business strategy, right? Responsiveness is a business strategy, and the IT supports that. One of the things that people also fail to do is that when they do it at an operational level, they sort of have an Agile project here and an Agile project there, and I've seen many organizations have 2, 3, 4, 8, 10 successful Agile projects. And then the organizational antibodies come out, and they attack, right? One of our clients right now, they sort of picked a bad project for their pilot project. Maybe some of you have done this. They picked a pilot project in which the Agile team was embedded in a bigger team of non-Agile teams. And so, of course, the non-Agile teams are throwing rocks all the time, right? And so from a portfolio level, how do you look at rolling out Agile across the organization in the most effective way? So a couple of organizations that have done Agile from a business perspective, Salesforce I just talked about. Suncorp in Australia has done a really good job. Jeff Smith, their CEO. This is an example where Jeff was the CIO of Suncorp and then implemented Agile stuff within the IT organization and then moved into the CEO of the business services group and is really expanding the Agile message beyond that. Other organizations like Capital One. So they're not a tremendous number of these yet, but they're a growing number. And in fact, one of the speakers at our Agile Executive Conference in August was from a smaller, medium-sized company in the US. And they looked at getting their organization more agile, and they had been doing that for 3 or 4 years, and only then were they actually looking to make IT more agile. So they were going from an agile organization to agile IT rather than the other way around. So that's really the enterprise agility story. And again, revolving around what's the business case for being agile, and particularly around these ideas of responsiveness versus efficiency. So now I want to talk a little bit about doing agile and being agile. And so this is the kinds of things that I'm going to talk about. really built on the enterprise vision. So one of the things that we've done as we've implemented Agile within our organizations is we have asked the staff at the contributor level, we've asked them to do really hard stuff, right? If you think about it, we've asked developers to get out of their cubes and to sit together in a room and be co-located. We've asked them to do more unit testing and more automated unit testing. We've asked them to do test-driven development. Gosh, we've asked them to change their social structure, right? We've asked them to pair program. We've asked product owners to be an integral part of the group and work with it on a day-to-day basis. We've asked testers in the testing group to embed themselves in the development team and actually test things on an incremental basis rather than all at the end. We've asked these people to do very difficult things from both a technological and a sociological perspective. I don't think we've asked management and leaders to do equally hard things. And so one of the things that I'm going to talk about as we go through some of these practices, you're going to see that they're hard. You'll look at some of these things and you'll say, I don't think I can do that in my organization. But I think that some of these things will actually accelerate the idea of enterprise agility, and again, they are hard. So I think on the one hand, we have business goals, responsiveness, agility, profitability, market share, those kinds of things. And then we have the delivery level, Agile, Lean, Kanban, XP. And I think there's this middle level where there are execution levers. These are levers that management and leadership has that can make a huge difference in the results. And I think sometimes there are levers that you may not even know you have, but you can have enormous impact on Agile delivery teams. And these are the four. This one is the hardest, do less. And I'm going to explain that in a few minutes, but on the surface, and I use that term explicitly to kind of say, ooh, do less? No, we want to do more, right? We want to do more with less, actually, is what most people talk about. And I want to talk about doing less with less. Quality. I'm not sure that a lot of management and leadership, even within IT organizations, understand the impact they can have on quality. Speed to value. How do we get things more quickly? And then, if you really want to make an Agile transition, how are you going to engage and inspire your organization? There was recently a study done by an HR organization, and I forget the exact numbers, but it's something like 20 to 30% of our staffs are probably fully engaged. Right? 20 or 30%, and the rest of them are just coasting. Some of them are doing worse than that, right? Now, how many of you have a system that looks like that? Okay, or several systems that look like that, right? This is one of the things that Agile teams run up against all the time, which is old clunky legacy systems, right? But even new systems can have what we call technical debt. The real question here is, how does quality really impact our ability to deliver value? And I've been talking about technical debt, and a lot of people in the Agile community have been talking about technical debt for quite a while now. But it's only more recently that we've had some tools to actually start measuring it in a reasonable way. So I want to talk a little bit about quality. Does quality really matter? Michael Ma is sort of the metrics guru in the Agile community. He's done a lot of talks at Agile conferences. And he and I worked on this one client about, this was six years ago or something like that. It was a scientific instrument company in Canada. They make mass spectrometers for the pharmaceutical industry. And they were really getting dinged on the quality of the software in their instruments. So we took a look at projects before and after Agile. We took a look at a half dozen projects before and a half dozen projects after, and then also compared this to Michael's database of some 7,500 projects. You'll notice some real pluses here. 61% reduction in project costs, 24% reduction in project schedule, nearly 40% reduction in staffing. And Michael's contention and my contention is that those improvements were driven by a single thing, and they're driven by an 83% reduction in cumulative defect removal rates. they went from 4 times the industry average to a half the industry average in defect rates. One of the quirky things about software is that if you want faster software development, if you focus on speed, you will not get it. You'll get poorer quality and slower speed. If, in fact, you focus on quality, you will get the rest of the stuff you're looking for. Now, high quality, sometimes we get confused because we think, oh, those developers, they're just looking for perfection. We're not looking for perfection, we're looking for high quality. Perfection would be 0 here. I don't think we'll ever get there. But high quality is really, really important to all of the other things. And there have been studies after study that have kind of shown this, and have been showing it for 20 years. Capers-Jones wrote a book in 1993 on software measurement, said this exactly the same thing. And this was in a more traditional vein. One of the things that Michael has found in studying several other companies too, that's unique to Agile development, that typically when you double the staff, you at least quadruple the number of defects, if not more. That's been the standard of 475 projects that he's done in his database. He was very surprised to do a couple of studies of some big Agile organizations where they increased their staff significantly and the defect levels went down a little bit, completely against historical norms. And so again, another data point in terms of quality. If you don't look at anything else, I actually think the Agile community has contributed more than anything else to the art and science and practice of software development is the focus on quality and testing and automated testing. This is my technical debt curve, which I've been using for at least 10 years. Basically saying at product release, the product's in pretty good shape, and the question is, do we fix a little bit of technical debt or do we do new features? And the answer is new features, right? And we make that decision time after time after time, and what happens is that curve goes up a little bit, and then all of a sudden it shoots up, and the customer says, oh, I just need this simple change. Okay, that'll be 4 months. You ever had to give that kind of answer to somebody, as a customer? And the customer says, God, my 8-year-old could do it in a week. But it's because of all the old legacy systems. And so customer responsiveness goes down. What happens when customers' responsiveness goes down? They get louder, right? And when they get louder, they put more pressure on you to put things in faster, which means you try to put things in faster and you increase the technical debt and you get into this vicious cycle. Not only that, but it's been shown that delivery speed begins decreasing pretty substantially, even iteration by iteration. And the problem with high levels of technical debt is that once you get there, once you get out into here, into this part of the curve, all your solutions are bad ones. There are no good solutions left. And so one of the things I think the Agile community is beginning to do is to say, look, as an organization, one of the things you really need are technical debt prevention and correction strategies, because it can have an enormous impact on your organization. And as I said, there are a few tools that are out there now and a few organizations who are kind of helping people look at their levels of technical debt from a qualitative and a quantitative basis. Speed to value, again from this IBM study, the ability to execute with speed. Again, driven by quality, but it's interesting when we talk about projects that succeed and projects that fail. I can kind of guarantee you that a project that delivered something in 3 months, even if it was like a month late, would probably be viewed as being successful. A project that was delivered in 18 months that had originally a 22-month schedule would be considered a failure, just because anything that goes on for 18 months has got to be taken too long. So it's an interesting thing about schedule and timing and the expectations of success and failure. So one of the things that we really talk about in Agile development is how do we reduce the cycle, right? How do we reduce the portfolio cycle? How do we reduce the delivery cycle? And I realize some of you work for really big organizations. A friend of mine was doing a pilot project. This was back in the 1990s, before we really called it Agile. And she called me up to ask me about a couple things. And she said, yeah, we're doing this pilot project, yada, 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 and it's scheduled for 18 months. And I said, 18 months? I said, that's not an Agile project. She said, for them it is. But I want to talk about one other aspect of quality. How many of you have ever been involved in an Agile project or something like this, where on the one hand, management says, be agile, be adaptive and flexible. We want you to use this agile approach so you can be oriented to change. And on the other hand, they say, yeah, but you have to meet the plan. Right? You have to be on time and on budget and on scope. You set up this, do we want to be adaptable or do we want to be predictable? And the answer is, we've got to figure out how to do both. But I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So what is high performance in an Agile environment? And my contention is that the traditional project management performance measures of scope, schedule, and cost are the wrong ones. That those are constraints. They are not objectives. That the objective is, I want to deliver something valuable to the client. And I don't measure that value by did we checkmark all of the requirements. I measure that value by going to the customers and saying, are we ready to release this product? Can we release this product and can you get value from it? I know of project teams, a friend of mine was on one, that was 20% through with the project and the funding got cut. Because they had been doing iterative development, they went back to the client and they said, only 20% of this is done, do you want us to deploy it? And they said, yes, that's a valuable 20%. And so the question at the end of every iteration is, why can't we deploy this product today? Not, did we get all the requirements done or did we get all the stories done? And then secondly, quality. Scope, schedule, and cost. Where is quality? People would say, well, it's in scope. Or other people would say, well, it's in the middle of the triangle. It's not there. And that's the way we've done a lot of projects in the past. Quality is not here. Again, if quality is really important, we're going to make that a major part of the triangle. Reliability is, does it do what it's supposed to do today? And adaptable is, can it be easily modified in the future so you can respond to the business? And then cost, schedule, and scope are really constraints. They are constraints on our delivery of valuable product at a quality manner. And they're very important because the schedule or the cost may in fact dictate the design or how much value you can get out. But they're not the objectives. So I think one of the things that from a management standpoint you have to take a look at is, will our current measures of success be what we want in an Agile environment? And at least at this level, I would say, no, you need to make some changes. Let's talk about do less, because this also gets into value too. Do less, but get more. So I'm talking about do the simplest things possible that delight the customer. However, and this is sort of the Agile simplicity mode, I want to increase throughput. So for example, one of the things you really, and I'm not going to talk about this much today, one of the things you really need to look at in your organization is reducing work in process. Most people have far too many projects going on at the same time, and they end up thrashing and wasting a lot of time. Work on work in process. That's throughput. I want to increase innovation. I want to increase value, and I want to increase quality. One of the things you hear all the time in software development and IT organizations is we want to improve productivity, right? What does improving productivity mean in knowledge work? It's input over output or output over input, output over input. How do you measure that? Is it hours? What happens to the team that come up with this really innovative idea and allow you to drop 3 features that you thought you needed but now you don't? One of the things about Agile, I'm going to talk about it more in a few minutes, The real advantage of Agile that nobody talks about very much is all the things that you don't do, because you're really focused on value versus cost the whole way through. Every time I look at this slide, I sort of go, wow. 3 studies that have been done. Standish Group study, done and reported on at XP 2002. And there was a bunch of different companies that they studied. 64% of the code was never or rarely used. Now, maybe some of that code was end-of-year processing you only do once a year. I can see that. But 64%? A Department of Defense, U.S. Department of Defense study. 2% of the code was used as written. 2%. Now, IEEE software, 400 projects over 15 years. We did 2.5 times as good as the military. Less than 5% of the code was used, right? Now, you can say, well, my organization's different. We really hone in on features and we really get only the ones we have to have. What would happen if you could reduce the number of features or stories in your projects by 5% or 10% or 15% or 20%? That would free up a lot of money to do your Agile transformation, to do technical debt reduction, to do all kinds of other things to reduce your maintenance load. So this doing less, in particular, has to do with how do we do less features. I love this quote from the founders of a small company called 37 Signals. Everyone tries to do too much, solve too many problems, build products with too many features. We say no to almost everything. If you include every decent idea that comes along, you'll just wind up with a half-assed version of a product. What you want is to build half a product that kicks ass. Let's look at a value curve. So let's just see that cost increases linearly over the life of this project. In a traditional project, you really only start getting the value towards the end, right? In fact, the curve probably goes more like this, and then you start getting some value. In an Agile project, particularly if you're doing continuous deployment, you can actually get value early on. And the value curve exceeds the cost curve. But that's not really the most important thing. The most important thing is, what's the right cutoff point? If you go to your CIO, your CFO, and you say, on this particular project, should we deliver 100% of the value for 100% of the cost? Or how about 90% of the value for 70% of the cost? What would they pick? Maybe the next most valuable feature is on the next project. And so this is one of the places where you do more from a portfolio level by doing less at a project level. So you're getting more because now, if I begin cutting these projects off early, I can start doing more projects because I've cut them off early. And look at what it does to your returns. Now let's just say that this is discounted cash flow, so we don't have to worry about the timing of money. But let's say I have a project that has 100,000 pounds of income and 800,000 pounds of cost. Look at the difference in return. I double my return from 25 to 50% on that project by shaving a little bit off of the value, out of the value in what I'm doing, the features, and even more out of cost. And plus, it gives me 25% of the next project that I can get in the same time frame. So there's tremendous advantages. And I think this is one of the things that, again, has not been talked about enough in the Agile community in terms of doing less. And you want to do less from a portfolio level and a project level and an iteration level. At every level, you begin analyzing, do I do this feature or do I not do this feature, or do I cut this feature down by 20%? And you've got to have some management involved in those decisions, because I'll tell you, product management and product owners are not going to make those decisions, right? Their job is to produce products that have lots of cool features in them. And so to ask them to do some of those kinds of discussions is really hard, right? So there's got to be an incentive or direction from a management level in terms of getting there. So what's the message here? What happened to BlackBerry, Nokia, Motorola when the Apple iPhone came out? Who was the leader in cell phones until that. The Motorola Razr was the phone. Do you know they're coming out with a new version of Razr that's a smartphone now? I think it's probably a little too late. Look at all these companies over here. Where are they now? This one got me. I was reading about this. Business Week, one of the premier business magazines in the U.S., sold for $1 a couple of years ago. Jeffrey Moore has this new book out called Escape Velocity. And basically what he's saying is you have to escape the gravitational field of last year's operating plan. Because what happens is you've got all of these things coming on, and how do you respond to all these things? Mobility, social business, cloud computing, and I would really put a fourth one up there, data analytics. Those four things are really having tremendous impact from a technology standpoint on today's businesses, and how are we going to deal with those things? And what Jeffrey Moore says is, unfortunately, there's a black hole called our current year operating plan. And getting enough investment out of that operating plan to fund new product categories is really hard. And that's another reason why you need to do less. You need to do less so you can escape to the future, so that you'll have something to invest in future projects that are going to really make a big difference in revenue over the next few years. And finally, in terms of do, talking about engaging staff. So I said staff engagement was pretty low. Dan Pink, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates You. How many of you have read that book? Okay, interesting stuff. Basically what he's saying is extrinsic motivators don't work very well. It's the intrinsic stuff that really motivates people. And I like to contrast, and the Agile community really does this, but we don't use quite the words that Dan used, and I think he's got better words. But just think about for a minute an example here. Think of the open source movement. Why does the open source movement exist? Why would I program for free? Right? Doesn't make any sense. Autonomy. I get to choose what I do and when I do it and what I work on. Mastery. I get to work with the best. Open source is a meritocracy. I get to really hone my skills and work my way up the ladder. And purpose. Most open source projects have some sort of higher purpose, right? We're trying to oust Microsoft, or we're trying to oust Oracle, or whatever that is, right? There's an open source project for running medical clinics that's used a lot in Africa. And so we're helping better the health and welfare of people in third world countries. So there are these kinds of purposes. And so this is some of the stuff in terms of the management, in terms of, okay, how do we look at how we motivate people or create an environment where they motivate themselves? So let's talk about being agile. So there's a difference between being half-assed and half-done. I throw this in here just to indicate the difference between doing things in an iterative manner, doing them in a partial manner, and then checking it out, rather than doing something going on and on and on, and then finding out you did it wrong. And too many people are not differentiating between these. The other thing about Agile delivery is I see a lot of senior execs saying, be Agile to the organization. And my question to them is, in what ways are you Agile? Right? You have to be the change you wish to see, and not just tell other people to do it. So what is the difference here? I love these quotes by Dee Hock. Dee was the CEO of Visa International for a number of years. He created a management style called chaotic management, balanced on the precipice between chaos and order. Simple, clear purpose and principles give rise to complex, intelligent behavior. Complex rules and regulations give rise to simple, stupid behavior. I love this sign. Caution, water on road during rain. And so what Agile is all about is the first, giving people simple, clear purpose and principles and letting their innate intelligence and innovation and creativity come out. So again, we're trying to move from a command control approach to leadership to an adaptive approach to leadership. Another book in this field by Jürgen Appelo has gotten a lot of play, Management 3.0. So adapting, exploring, facilitating, and writing paradox. Kind of an adaptive leadership mindset. Traditional managers focus on following the plan with minimal changes, whereas an Agile leader focuses on adapting successfully to inevitable changes. Kent Beck's first book on XP was subtitled Embracing Change. And it sounds easy, right? But it's not. It's taking a whole different attitude about change, and that change is inevitable and we're going to have to adapt to it, and we may have to actually change the plan as we're in the middle of it. And so we may not end up at where we originally planned to go. We may end up at some different place, but that's the right place based on new information. And in particular, to get back to this idea of value, Gantt chart. What's a Gantt chart focused on? Time and activities, right? Tasks. This is called a parking lot diagram. It was developed by Jeff DeLuca in Australia. Each of these boxes is a business feature. Each of the numbers in here are stories within that. It kind of tells you what's actually been done. And so when you give that to a customer and you say, the customer says, I need a couple new features here, and you say, fine, those new features go in here, they'll enhance this capability, which will build some value in here, but we don't have enough time to do all of it, so we'll need to take a couple of features out of here. And they can see that from a business value perspective and begin to make better decisions about the project. There's several different things that we need in order to do adapting. We need to do these 4 things. You may use different tools, but we need to do these 4 things. We need to figure out what's important. So what's your prioritization scheme? We have to have a shorter time horizon model. Just like we do in Agile software development. We have a roadmap, we have releases, and we have iterations, each at a different time frame. How do we do that from a management perspective? We've got to focus more on decision making and how we make rapid decisions, OODA loop from Boyd, for example. And then we have to have a change model that we use. What's a model of change that, I mean, there's one model of change that says we go along here and we go to a class and now we're better, right? That's the inappropriate view of change. A lot of people in the Agile community use the Satir change model, but there are a number of change models out there. When Capital One first went through their Agile initiative for their organization, they found they had 17 change models that they were using in their organization, and so they selected one. Exploring. This is a big change for a lot of managers. You move from what I call a plan-do approach to an Envision-Explore approach. It's very different, and it's really hard to get your arms around it first. So the traditional approach is plan it all out in detail and then do it, and to just check off the task, right? As opposed to do a little bit of planning up front, envision where you want to go, and understand that it's going to change as you move forward, and then as you go along, you're kind of exploring into that vision. Let me give you one way in which it's very, very different from a management perspective. On a traditional project, you get a great big plan up front. We know what we're doing. We know where we're going. We're confident, right? And as the project goes along, your confidence goes where? And you actually start writing code. And then you actually start testing the code. Oh, we're in big trouble, right? So your confidence goes down. In an Agile project, your confidence in the beginning is lower because you don't have this detailed plan, and you're basically recognizing the uncertainty of the world. And then as you begin delivering software in an iterative manner, your confidence actually goes up over the length of the project. And one of the things that happens in an Agile project, and some of you may have recognized this or seen this, is because you start off without all that upfront planning, Agile projects can actually look like they're running off the rails early on. And you have problems with Agile projects early on, which is actually great, because early is when you can correct. But it's a different mindset than the traditional one, is where you correct stuff after you don't have any time to correct it, right, towards the end. So those are just really different kinds of approaches in an Agile project. Facilitating, being a facilitator as opposed to a director, and we talked a lot about collaboration. One of the things we don't talk about as much with managers is that they have a responsibility of clarifying things in ambiguous situations. So one of the things you really need in an Agile environment is you need good visions and themes that people are shooting for, so that they don't get involved in sort of oscillation instead of iteration. And you have to clarify things, and you have to make some decisions as a manager when people are sort of bogged down in the ambiguousness and the uncertainty, sometimes you have to clarify by making some decisions. So facilitating is not just trying to get self-organizing teams running. And then one of the more difficult things to do as a manager is what I call and management. This is a complex world that we're working in. It is not a simple world. There are no black and white solutions. A lot of things are paradoxical. The thing I talked about earlier in terms of adaptability versus predictability. It is not either or, it's both. How do we figure out how to do both? And I love this diagram of this guy, a manager sitting on a horse that's going in two different directions, right? It's a paradoxical situation. And so we've got to be smart in terms of how we go about different decisions that are tricky. And then one of the things that we have to do is we have to be more adaptive and have a more adaptive mindset as we're trying to approach these paradoxical situations. So I talked earlier about too many people are stuck at Agile 101. You have to do Agile 101. You have to learn the basics. But then you have to learn to move beyond those basics. And that's really hard for a lot of people. The painting up here is by Picasso, and this was one of his early paintings. It looks pretty traditional. He was learning his craft. And then he went beyond painting 101 to become famous. And so that's part of being able to be an and leader as opposed to an or leader. Trying to figure out how to do both things rather than look at it as black or white. And so we started off with really enterprise agility and the ideas of responsiveness and efficiency. We took a look at the strategic impact of Agile as sort of Agile reaches its kind of epitome, which is continuous delivery. And then we talked about both doing Agile and being Agile and the different aspects of that. There is a white paper that parallels this talk that is available on thoughtworks.com. I have a blog that I blog about these kinds of issues. Thank you very much.